The lost language of value.
The language of strategy, operations, but also the language of influence.
Why aren't we multilingual?
It's almost a different, looking at an elephant from different perspectives, and everyone sees a slightly different picture.
Nobody wants your CEO to come downstairs to the technical department and micromanage everything you're doing, and undoing bolts and putting them back into your AI system. Nobody wants that.
Value has got to be the thing that brings everyone together, and that language needs to be clear.
I see a huge disjoint, and it didn't need AI to be true. Hello, I'm Lindley Gooden.
And I'm Edosa Odaro. Welcome to the AI Value Podcast.
Now, every few episodes, we are going to look at sort of conceptual stuff, the really big trends, the research that makes AI tick, and things that make it fall down as well, and how we can deal with that stuff, the wider implications that the research brings to us. This time, we're going to talk about something called the lost language of value. And that's really interesting because we talk quite a lot in our series about how things fail and how much of that doesn't work. But actually, one of the things that came up last time we did a research episode was communication and conversation and how we need to really talk. So that involves a word, language. Edosa, are we talking the same language, or are we talking completely different dialects?
Oh, goodness, I wish it was all the same language. No, actually, to be honest, I mean, I looked at this quite deeply in my last book, actually, The Values of Artificial Intelligence. And one of the things that I did was actually categorize the kinds of language that actually are utilized actually within AI, actually across organizations in some ways. And the three different categories that I put together were actually the language of strategy, the language of operations, but also the language of influence. And that's those three different sort of language types across the kind of different groups of people interacting to solve, and in some ways deliver on AI.
So why aren't we multilingual? I mean, look, I've worked in communications for a very, very longer than I can possibly say publicly. And I've worked with a lot of communications teams, and I can tell you language, it can seem very clear. Cosmetically, it seems like we're talking the same language, but it falls down immediately when you have to speak that language to somebody in power who doesn't want to hear what you've got to say. If you're going to deliver bad news, then suddenly everyone stops speaking, full stop. And that is the issue that I've certainly come across when you're trying to engage the public, when you're trying to talk to people about important things such as AI. First of all, you may not understand it very well. It may be sort of hollow words, but really that's the problem, is that people stop talking altogether when there's bad news to deliver.
Yeah, and I think, in some ways, I always want to take a step back and just think about a lot of the stats and a lot of the numbers, a lot of the research you see out there, and compare that to what happens in reality. So you hear things like 85%, 95% even now, I think, with the MIT recent research of AI actually fails to deliver value. But when you're sitting on the other side within organizations or supporting organizations like I tend to do, you actually get a very different picture. A lot of people who sit in boards or senior executives of all kinds, they say things like, and there's research actually to just back this up. I think there was a one from McKinsey, I think. Yeah. There's come up with this 15% number around, how many people are actually able to put a hard number around value that's been delivered. And it's shocking.
15% of people are able to talk to their board about what's working. Is that about right?
Yeah, exactly. The way it's framed is around, can you put a hard number to what value has actually been delivered? Right? And so, and if you think about it, as a board or a CEO or a senior exec, that's what you really want. And, the fact that they're saying that's their sort of viewpoint is that there's not many are able to actually do that. Yeah. And that's worrying. But when you talk to technical people who are actually there delivering this stuff, all of this good stuff, they completely disagree. And most people I talk to say, well, actually, we are delivering all this value. We are, building models that do in fact really clever things and, impacting on how we operate. So there's a big disconnect there, and that's very worrying.
It reminds me of that thing when you're pretending to work really hard in your office and you're tapping away at your typewriter. And this will only work for people watching us, not for listening to us. You do this with your typewriter. You're just tapping, but no words are going into your screen. And it's, you mentioned worrying. I mean, if 15% of people are able to report to their board what's really working, if only 15% can do that, that's horrendous. And it kind of pairs with the figure that I mentioned in a previous episode from the OECD, that 85% of us, the workforce, know how to interpret data properly from AI. I mean, it's just like, 85% don't know how to interpret data. So it's, it's kind of the, you either don't know and you're pretending you know, or you do know and you're bad at communicating it. I mean, that is many different languages. I mean, surely we've got to get better than that at doing our communication inside around AI. We can't do this forever.
No, and think about it. I mean, some practical examples. I mean, you think about, say you're talking to an AI team, a data team, a technical team. They're coming in, and of course, rightly so, they would talk about accuracy and predictive accuracy of a model and what that's actually doing in terms of, delivering value that way. But a board is saying, okay, so how many decisions has that actually changed? Or how much has it actually shifted behavior? Looking at the outcome side of things. And it's also the thing that actually sits in between all of that is people of influence, of different levels of influence within the organization, who have, in a lot of times, have very different and varying incentives around what their focus is, what they're trying to achieve within their areas. And so you've got this whole thing where, we're almost talking about, it's almost a different, looking at an elephant from different perspectives, and everyone sees a slightly different picture, of the same thing. And you wonder why actually there's so much discontent and dissatisfaction around this single thing that everyone seems to be investing in, and with all this significant expectation as well.
It's the hand. Remember that line drawn rabbit and duck picture? And if you think it's you might think it's a duck, or you might think it's a rabbit, or indeed that fantastic viral thing from years ago where it was that blue and gold, or was it white and something else dress? And it was because of the lighting, you couldn't, half the world thought it was this color and half the world thought it was that. It's an interpretation thing. Now, look, so the lost language of value is essentially influence or maybe translation. So how important is it? I mean, do we have these people, do you think, in the average AI delivery team of the person who is the translator? They can bring together the data, or should we just use the AI to translate what's really going on? Don't we need people inside businesses, inside organizations? I mean, I know it's easier said than done, but who are active translators who can understand what's really going on. They have a certain amount of technical knowledge, and they also have the guts to talk to the CEO about this thing and what's going well and what's going not. Is that the function that we should all be really focusing on, whatever organization we work in? I mean, just having translators seems to me to be one of the most important things we could do today.
Look, Lindley, I tell you, there's something I completely disagree with, and that is that, never mind hiring, never mind the resources, because you know what, agents can sort this out. We can just get agentic systems just to sort it all out. This fundamental problem here is that regardless of what delivers the actual value, if the recipient, if the one who is getting it, the one who's actually meant to benefit from it, doesn't see it as valuable, then it's lost. I call this, actually, there's a term I used in one of my pieces, which is actually the value fog. So you actually have it, it's there, but you can't see it. And so indeed, absolutely we need translators. And whether we're doing that by hiring people specifically for that capability and saying, look, that person is able to translate this kind of language of strategy into the language of tech and the other way around, and actually bring influence in that as well. Or we're using training and education and actually supporting people who already have capabilities and knowledge within organizations. But it is so essential that we have those translators within organizations.
So don't palm off all of your difficult news to your agents, because they're going to give different types of news that might be quite generative, that might be quite creative. So let's leave that alone for a second as an option. But actually, yes, okay, so hiring people in to do this, I mean, what a poison chalice. So let's forget that for a minute, because they won't last long. Okay, now let's go to people who have seniority in the organization already. Okay, now we're talking, because they are already respected. They already have the power. They can already deliver the bad news or the good news. I mean, the good news is essential too. We can't cherry pick that stuff. So is the option, in order to rediscover the lost language of value, is it important to give people in senior positions or medium to senior positions bit more technical knowledge, a bit more understanding, lots of updates to really understand, so that they can really understand where this project is, where these projects are, and the effects around the business. It does seem as though towards the top of any organization, there's got to be a much clearer view of the project or the projects that are happening, especially around AI, because people are investing a lot of money. They're happening fast. It's iterative, and it's difficult to see what's going on. So clarity seems to be the most important thing right now. It seems to be the hardest word, in the words of Elton John.
Yeah, clarity. I mean, the one thing I would tell you, and is there's so much of this, and again, I understand why it happens. So much is talk about we need to educate leaders, business leaders, and make them more technical.
Yeah.
I actually disagree and
right
with this, and I do.
Seriously, who else gets to do this? Who else?
Think about it. I mean, you're the CEO or you're the CFO. You've got your whole remit of what you need to do. You've got your concerns. You've got focus around running a business. Dealing with investors, dealing with the board. You don't need to go in and get a PhD in AI or data science to be able to interact with these things. I think, and equally, a lot of people say, well, actually, we need to get all these people in tech and AI to completely get business trained. Well, there's a reason why they're not the CEO. There's a reason why they're not the CFO. They need to focus on what they need to do. So I think we need to find a different way to actually get this to work. And I think for me, you almost want to have value as the thing that is in the midst of all of this, as the way to bridge the gap between all of these different areas, and that as a thing that creates an almost a bucket of communication that everyone can rally around and actually can align around that. And I think that's the fundamental thing for me, is if everyone learns the language of value, you don't then need to get re-educated in technical or re-educated in the business or wherever else and kind of lose your way. So I do fundamentally disagree with that.
Yeah, I have the privilege of speaking to very, very senior people on a regular basis in sessions, panels, workshops around things like communication, but often it's about interpretation of data and that sort of thing as well, because it's really, really important. I think businesses do understand there is some value in it. But the great thing about coming in from the outside world and talking really honestly with people in senior positions is that they're really honest with me too. And they often say, and this doesn't need AI to be part of this equation, they often say to me that actually, our policy and the practicality, they kind of live in different universes. What we really want to happen is this, and it's good standards. They really believe in it. They really hope that will happen. But it's really not being delivered. And that can be in so many different ways, but certainly it's coming through a lot that the use of AI is almost disconnected, disconnected in some ways from the rest of the business. We want to make efficiencies rather than seeing great new products coming out. We'd love to see the new products, but we're focusing on efficiencies. A lot of the tech giants are chopping jobs because they're getting ready for AI. Maybe it hasn't had an impact yet, but they're getting ready for it. So I see a huge disjoint, and it didn't need AI to be true. What we need to do, I would say, is that we need the organization to be much fitter and healthier in terms of the conversations they have internally and with their customers as well. It's really about sharpening the conversation, making it relevant, making AI something that everybody has a technical knowledge of to a certain degree.
Yeah, I do agree. Yes, indeed. And I think it's back to what you were saying there around communication, around clarity.
Yeah.
And I think it's what's going to be that vehicle that helps you make things clearer without trying to attempt to make all execs effectively an extension of the tech team, or it just wouldn't work. And equally, I don't expect technicians to run the business, or I think it's unfair, and perhaps they're not even interested in some ways in doing that. But I completely agree. I think it's also important to think about the impact of all this, in that what we're doing is we're investing time, effort, and not actually getting the results. And all of the stats point at a single thing, and that single thing is that there's a dissatisfaction with the outcomes that we're getting from all that we're seeing in terms of the hype in AI.
Yeah.
And that's a fact. And how do we get from where we are right now to where we need to get in terms of the overall outcomes, the promise of this nirvana of AI and agentic delivering us, a world, of abundance and one that we've at a level we've never seen. I just think something fundamentally needs to change.
I think I wake up every morning with the idea of a Nayivana. It's the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning. But yes, we're a long way from that. Look, we started with this McKinsey piece of research. 15% of people understand or know how to kind of report the progress or lack of up to their boards, and the OECD's research came back in that 85% of us lot as a workforce don't really understand the data we're getting out of AI. So there's a huge disjoint there. Clearly, it needs clarity. Clearly, there needs to be. Well, it sounds like an organization-wide awareness of. I think that's not even brain surgery. That's been sort of known in principle for a long time. It's how we get there. I wonder what we do right now, Edosa. I would push back on your point there about the senior people and their understanding. I mean, nobody wants your CEO to come downstairs to the technical department and micromanage everything you're doing, and undoing bolts and putting them back into your AI system. Nobody wants that, but it does seem to me that they have to share the responsibility. They absolutely do. They can't just bark orders down and say, I want this output, because they'll think very much in terms of revenue and efficiency. And they may not be thinking about the wider implications. So I don't know, between the two of us, we have to, disagree in a small way, in that if the leaders don't take responsibility, then nobody else will. And nobody, just as it is now, nobody will report upstairs there's a problem, Captain.
Absolutely. I think one thing that we are both absolutely aligned on is that value has got to be the thing that brings everyone together. And that language needs to be clear. It needs to, at the moment, we're sitting strategy, we're seeing operations, we're seeing influence, but there's nothing that sits across it all as a translator. And I think that is the fundamental difference between, what we want and what we're actually getting.
Yeah. Well, it's probably about time we wrapped up. I mean, everyone watching and listening to us, we agree on 98.99% of everything we talk about, but we found a moment of disagreement, which is probably important, because there are more than one perspective. But yeah, look, let's wrap this one up. It's been really interesting, and as ever, the one piece of research or a couple of pieces of research open up a wider conversation, and that's probably the way we should all be looking at AI and its implementation. Is that there are many ripple effects, and if you don't have clarity, if you don't have up-to-the-minute conversations, and you don't understand what these things are doing to your organization, you're storing up trouble, and the trouble could be tomorrow, because it's a lot of a faster turnaround. But really interesting, Edosa. I'll mention it right now. If you want to get in touch with us, you can do that very simply. Just look for at AI Values. That's where we are, and you can get in touch in many different ways. But look for that, and you'll find us. You can also get in touch with us on LinkedIn and stuff. If you have any ideas for research, if you have any ideas for guests or episodes, we'd love to hear from you too. And we'll keep on having this conversation. Edosa.
Absolutely. And as you can see, Lindley and I disagreeing here. I hope we're not the only ones. And send us your disagreements and send us your comments. And very open to have that conversation and you being part of that as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye.